At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Garrett Daun, how are you doing?
Hey, Doug, I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for asking.
Hey, I appreciate you being on the show. Now, you told me earlier, where are you at right now?
I'm actually in Osijek, Croatia, far northeast Croatia. Yeah.
Wow. And I'm sitting in Thailand, so entirely different experience here. It's amazing what we can do with technology, isn't it?
Yeah, truly. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Hey, listen, what I'd love for you to do is kind of share with the audience who you are. And you're doing a lot of things, like you kind of explained some of that. And also, how did your story, how did you get to the point of doing what you're doing at this point in time in life?
Yeah. So let's say I want to just narrow it down and say that I'm a radical undoing trainer, and we'll get into what exactly that is. That's probably the easiest and simplest way to describe who I am and what I do. And to explain that, radical undoing is a body movement and breathing methodology that breaks apart chronic tension in the body and then clears out a lot of the garbage that goes on in the mind. That's the simplest way I can put it. It gets people out of what I call the hell of the mind and back into the body, back into actuality. How I ended up doing that, I was struggling with all kinds of things, let's say 20 years ago, or for most of my childhood even, like anxiety, depression, just various kinds of mental suffering and existential kind of ennui and all this kind of stuff. And so I'd become a punk rocker and I'd become a protester and all this rebellion, got into this rebellion kind of thing. And at the end of that kind of internal battle, let's say it was externalized, then I started to realize that something internally maybe was wrong or was driving that. And I became like what I call a seeker. And so then I started reading everything, studying everything I could find. I mean, every religion, every technique, really weird stuff, like anything you could possibly imagine. And at the end result of that, I found this technique and this teacher, which was the radical undoing work. And he had a book called Undoing Yourself with Energized Meditation. And this book had a bunch of weird stuff in it, but it had solid exercises, just simple physical exercises that I could try out. And I was an experimenter, so I applied those. Probably over the course of a year, I did a bunch of these physical experiments and then other kind of cognitive experiments, some more adventures out in the world, and let's say creative experiments, all kinds of things like this. And then that culminated in doing a full lay down session where you're laying in a certain position, doing very specific breathing and doing body movements. And I had such a profound experience. Now, at that point, I was doing it out of a book. I laid down, I did that must have amounted to about 2 hours. And at the end of that experience, I was like so filled with life force, so filled with a lot of these terms I don't like to use because they get co-opted by, let's say, some of these new age movements and things like this. So they don't get, people get easily confused with this type of terminology, but I don't know how better to describe it. I was just overwhelmingly filled with awareness and life force. Like my fingers were tingling and buzzing, my whole body. And at that point, I looked down and I saw my fingers moving or my toes, and it was mind-blowing just that, wow, my foot is way down there and I can move it. So the way I describe it is I became aware that I actually have a body. And looking back, I saw, okay, I only had the idea of a body up until now. And that started sort of a cascade of revelations or awakenings where I realized most of what I had been doing with the seeking was just filling my head with new vocabularies for describing things, but nothing was changing. Nothing was different in my life. I just had a new vocabulary. I might meet a new friend group, and now we talk about these subjects instead of these subjects, but nothing was fundamentally different. With this work, I was brought back down to ground zero. back into my own physicality. And then I could tell the difference. And this is key. I could tell the difference between the garbage going on in my mind. So all the interpretations, all the reactions to internal and external stimuli, I could tell the difference between the imagination and the contents versus what was actually happening. So a lot of my fears started to dissolve because I could see, okay, there's no threat on my life. What am I doing sitting here feeling afraid? Or if I'm upset or if I'm sad. So suddenly it was like I'd stumbled into a new world of actuality, and I could see the difference between where I was trapped in my mind and then being here. Didn't mean everything got easier, but it meant that I had some ground under my feet to start to move forward in life. Instead of living in this life dominated by the imagination and emotional reactions. From there, then I could see that this was going on in other people. And as I went deeper and deeper, I went and met the author of that book and then studied under him. Ended up going to massage school, got deep with, so I got deep into my body. It was like it was activated. So I got deep with rock climbing, even some mountain rescue courses, rope work, was riding my bicycle every day, got into body weight conditioning, a bunch of different martial arts. It just was like a body kind of renaissance in my life. And then as a result of all that, and then doing the massage school, meeting with the teacher, I realized this was something I wanted to do with other people. Mostly by the urging of people that saw what I was going through and were like, what is this you're doing? What is this stuff you're practicing all the time? Can I try it out? So I said, yeah, sure, why not? And after a few years of just doing that for free with friends and sharing it around, I started to realize, wow, this is actually a potent thing, and that people can benefit from this. So I ended up creating a business out of it. And that was over the course of, let's say, 7 years that it took, training and getting into the life of the body a lot more. So wow. Hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
So now you're helping other people through this process that you've been talking about, and helping them. So let's talk about, because one thing that you said that I found really interesting, and this probably has nothing to do with what we were going to talk about, but you said that as you were younger and you were experiencing a lot of that stuff, that you got into protests, you were a protester and those types of things. Yeah. In today's world, we see that happening right now all over the place. What would you say is the mental cause? What is causing such protests going on? Some of it absolutely has some validity to it, so I don't want to negate any validity. But at the same time, we're seeing a lot of stuff going on that probably is just people are getting caught up in the moment and getting involved in these protests and creating issues and so forth. What's your take on that? And what did you experience, and how did you get out of that mentality?
Man, it's a long road, but and I was deep into it. I wasn't just a liberal protester. I was into like punk rock, and at first, when I was very angry and say 15, 16, it was really deep into that world. And then I had this sense of rebellion, and I had this sense of unfairness, like, oh, these people are oppressed, that person's oppressed, and coupled with seeing a lot of my parents and my friends' parents I saw that the standard was kind of this mediocre dislike for the work that people are doing, and yet they're just trudging off to do it, and no one's doing anything about that. No one's doing anything to address that. So that was maybe the first thing I noticed when I was younger. We go camping on the weekends, all the fun stuff happens on the weekends, and everybody's having a good time, and then they're miserable during the week. So that was like the first trigger for me. And then let me simplify it, boil it down. It's chronic tension in the body, number one, that's been dropped out of awareness. So you might know with people with chronic back pain, but they have to work a job, their life depends on it, then during the day, they won't feel the back pain at all. It'll just drop out of awareness. But then when they get home, when they start to relax, then they feel it again. It starts to really put pressure on them. So this chronic tension builds up over time, and I believe it correlates with inaccuracies or falsities in the mind. So lies in the mind, tension in the body, they require each other. And in my case, it was that anger and that rebellion, and I didn't know how to handle the internal struggle, so it became externalized. I wanted to fight against even civilization itself. Oh, we were better off when we were hunter-gatherers. I was all the way to that extreme. So the war would never end, no matter what success you have in that as a protester. It's like, if you're going after industrial civilization, there's just no way. So it was absurd. And at some point I started to realize it was absurd. But the reason behind it was I saw some injustices. My mom was kind of like a more old school liberal. So she was anti-war, anti-gigantic business, anti-people getting oppressed. And my dad was more working class electrician, not as involved in that same mindset. But some of that influence from her then made me more keen to observing, let's say, what I perceived injustice. And once I started looking down that rabbit hole, it's started to absorb all my awareness. And that was a way, I think, to not deal with what was going on inside me, to not actually confront. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That so often, and I appreciate what you're saying there. It's really those internal, subconscious situations that are going on in our lives that are causing that stress, that anxiety, that anger, all of that type of thing, and then we express it externally. And the reason I wanted to ask you that, because as I've interviewed a number of people, and we're talking about how do we help with anxiety, how do we help with all of these issues that people are experiencing emotionally, and everyone says, well, the first step is awareness. And so my first question then to them is, how can you be aware? What are the signs? And I think you've so well described here the fact that, okay, you know what? Here's what you were doing, and you suddenly became aware that this was all internal rather than external, and yet you were responding in an external way. So for the audience, I think it's so important for them to understand that as they look at their life, as they look at their behavior, if it's not making total sense to them, it's time to do that awareness introspective type of situation and figure out what's going on. Let's talk about body movements. You're the first one I've talked to about body movements. Now, I will say, from what you're telling me, it sounds a little bit different than yoga. If it's not, then let me know that. But this is interesting because what you're saying is body movements that are simple can demolish anxiety and make your life 75% more fun. So
I love to play with those numbers.
Yeah. Can you share with the audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it's let me preface it by saying I use this model for explanation called two worlds model. One is the world of, to simplify it, I'll call it the world of words. So let's say there's like a globe, like a snow globe that goes from here and then up around here, like above us, above your head. And inside that is all these reactions, interpretations, abstractions, right? So there's a real physical life event that happens, or a memory of something, or an imaginary future catastrophe, something like this. And then the person reacts to the contents of the imagination as if it's real. This causes tension. So if we're all sitting in a room together, there's no physical threat present. But one person is terrified of some imaginary thing in the future. Another person is really sad. Another person's full of anxiety or having a panic attack or something like this. They're reacting to things that are not physically present. So they're not grounded in the mind is somewhere else than where the body is. So a lot of systems, a lot of psychology, a lot of approaches try to deal intellectually with that situation.
Yes.
Or chemically with that situation. Chemically, whether it's illegal drugs or psychiatric meds or whatever. So what I discovered with the radical undoing work is that you use the body. You go straight to the body first and break apart the chronic tensions, and then that produces the ability to have more awareness. So simple exercise like face stretching, really slow movements, but with a lot of contraction and intensity of the face. And the reason this works for like 5 minutes. I should add too. It's not just a quick thing, but you slow down, you breathe, you do stretch the face for 5 minutes, nice and slow, lots of intensity. The reason that's so important is there's a greater amount of physical brain matter monitoring the facial muscles. Those should be obvious for a number of reasons. Like when the mouth, this is where we get our food, our sustenance. This is where all our sensory receptors, most of our sensory receptors are located. So we need the brain needs to monitor these functions and these muscles. And then the brain is also checking the structure of the muscle contractions in the face to see, like, if the nostrils are up like this, that's showing disgust, for example, or all the different combinations, or the fake smile, or the real smile with the eyes, or the different kinds of things like this. So we're constantly looking at other people's faces, they're perceiving our faces, and we're gathering all kinds of data about the state or the condition that that person is in. We're projecting it out from our own face. So when you do the face stretches, you get back to neutral. So one kind of cool aspect of it is you're not dragging emotional reactivity and baggage from one situation to the next. You stop, do the face stretches, get back to neutral, and now you can perceive what's going on for other people instead of projecting out what's going on for you. That's one simple way that the face stretches work. There's way more to it than that, but that's one aspect of where the body starts to be act as an interface with that inner world, and a way to clear out this trash from there.
Well, and I love that. I love how you described that we're circled, our head is circled, with all of that stuff, and just, and it's so true that creates our reality. Those beliefs, everything that we consciously are not even aware of, creates a reality for us. And yet what you're really describing, which I love, is that as you focus on something more physical, it takes you away from that mental subconscious situation, and you become what we would refer to as more mindful. You're really focusing on something, and initially, at least, I would think that helps to relieve. So as you talk about that, you talked about how you got involved in doing a number of body movements and so forth. Share with the audience really what type of activities, what type of time commitment, what are some of the things that people can understand they can do, need to do, and how that might help them, and how much time does it actually take during the day to be able to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that, because that's an important one. This work isn't a quick fix, though it can become one in the future with dedication. I'll explain what I mean by that. But first, I want to give you the basic times. Let's say overall, for a really deep, I'd say permanent shift in one's life, meaning that you're grounded and you know forever the difference between the workings of the imagination versus being present in actuality. I would say 2 years, sometimes a lot more, sometimes less, but 2 years is kind of a good indicator. A person can go pretty deep with that, and they'll have gone from being a person who wishes and thinks about doing things to a person who's actually doing things. That's an interesting side effect, is a lot of the aspirations start to become activated just automatically. If they're ones that are coming from deep within the person, if they're just things the person thinks they should do to please mom and dad or other people, those will usually go away. So, for example, I had a client, I saw the guitar, it reminded me, a client who was just pressuring himself to do guitar. He wanted to do guitar, but he just couldn't get himself to do it. Then after we worked together for a while, he realized, man, I only ever started learning guitar so I could pick up women and get dates when I was in high school. I don't want to play guitar. I don't even care about the guitar. But up until then, he was so desperate that he was a guitarist. He needed to do guitar, but he didn't, And then once he became aware, it was like, oh, I'm not even interested in this. And then a couple of years later, he returned to guitar, but it was actually more about passion than it was, this previous thing. So,
right.
So to answer the question about timing for on a daily basis, in the very beginning, a person could get started like with what I have on the YouTube. I put a little playlist, which is just face stretches, this shoulder exercise, something called the flop, and something called the laughing breath. That might take, let's say we do full-time limits for each one, 5 minutes on the face in the morning, once at night, 1 minute on the shoulders exercise, 2-3 minutes on the flops, and then another 2-3 minutes on the laughing breath. If a person really dedicated themselves to doing those every single day, let's say at night, just the face and shoulders even. So 6 minutes and 7 minutes at night, let's say 15-20 minutes in the morning, that alone would be huge, especially over a week, over 2 weeks, over a month. One caveat there is that the results of this type of work, some of them are instant. Sometimes you do the shoulders, you feel immediate relief. The mind is a little more clear, you feel more grounded. But the real magic is in the cumulative results, because every single time you break apart this chronic tension, then when you sleep at night, the brain remaps, the body image at a lesser amount of chronic tension. So chronic tension has become normalized, and then we mimic each other in society and as we're growing up. So we don't even know that it's not normal for us to have this kind of tension. Like almost everyone has it. Or for the butt to be squeezed, or the legs to be tight, or the knees to be locked, or to be standing with the hip cocked. There's all these different things. Or the diaphragm to be tight if you watch people breathe, or they're doing just belly breathing and the chest is all locked up, for example. So when you systematically attack those chronic tensions and get everything moving, get the life force moving again, and I mean that in the most physical way, nothing woo-woo or fancy about it at all, then the results become cumulative, meaning in the beginning you do face stretches, you might be overwhelmed with thoughts getting in your way. After a couple of weeks, a lot of that stuff is gone, and you start to notice the jaw is not tense anymore. It's hanging loose most of the time when you're relaxed. It's not, like this kind of thing.
Right.
The voice, sometimes you'll hear people's voices. Hi, thanks for calling, whatever it is. You can feel where it's trapped here. When I work with those people, I can hear and feel when it starts to move down. It starts, moves from here, and then this tension breaks up, and then it'll move into the throat, and then eventually you can feel it. It moves down into here and down into the belly, and that's a sign of this tension around the voice breaking apart systematically. So all this is to say, this work gives you cumulative results. So even though you're putting in the 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, the results are going to start to compound and compound, because then, now say you're not carrying that tension with you, the shoulders are less tense, so you have less of a sense of emergency, so less cortisol flowing through the body, for example, less reactivity. So then in your family life, or in your friendship, or in your work life, you suddenly don't have issues with people that you used to have, and often people won't even remember that they had the issues with people. And so the results are weird in that it could take 6 months to notice a result that already started happening 5 months earlier. Because someone will say, one specific client comes to mind. He said, "Oh, my wife was so amazed. I went to dinner at my father-in-law's, and in the past we used to fight every single time. And then this time we ended up getting along, working on a project together. And his wife was just standing there like, who is this man? What happened? And he didn't even remember that he had a bad time with that guy prior to that. So it was just so new of a perspective. So somewhere in there, and I don't know the exact science of it, but somewhere in there, in breaking that chronic tension, lessening the reactivity, then suddenly the tension isn't reasserting by getting into conflict with other people, and getting into conflict with your own ideas, getting into conflict with your family, with society in general. So you become more available. Say if the face isn't full of tension, it's not projecting issues out, it's then you're perceiving more things coming in from other people. So then, of course, you're more relatable. People treat you differently.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about it could take up to 2 years, and yet, just developing the habit, really, based on what I've read, it's anywhere from 30 days to 90 days for a habit to change. So there has to be that personal focus and willingness to develop that new habit of the face stretching, whatever those exercises are, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But whatever they are, it takes time to develop the habit. And then after that 30, 60, 90 days, it just becomes a habit. It's something that's natural. And then, as you say, for some, and this is what's really amazing to me, for some people, boom, instantaneous, all of a sudden things are happening. And for other people, like you said, for some, it could take a year to 2 years for them to finally feel and sense that freedom that they've been working for. And I find that really interesting, that how some people work so fast and other people take a lot longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is kind of fascinating. And I don't always know the reason for that, but sometimes a person, people could have a whole family, a family, they've had kids now, they have a job, and then they start to realize that they weren't really present when they were choosing these things. They weren't really aware when they were putting this life together. And then that starts to come unraveled. That's why I leave the word radical in there, and why I leave the word undoing, because it's not really for people who are just looking for some simple anxiety relief. It's like a whole internal, destruction and reconstruction in a way. And it can be intense. It can be scary at times, especially if we've been living in reactivity. And some people are scared when they notice that they're not afraid of things anymore. Now they're thinking, oh man, how could I get by if I don't have this reaction? What am I going to, some threat's going to happen because I'm not alert and afraid. You know what I mean? There's some bizarre contradictions that people have to face, and it takes repeated efforts over time until you can really let go of some of that stuff. But the beauty of the radical undoing work is it's a physical thing. It doesn't matter what the mind is throwing at you, and once you get enough back into the body, then you can go, okay, the mind's trying to tempt me into all these reactions, but I'm not going to go there. You have an option suddenly. And you have physical things you can do.
It's interesting you talk about how people can go through that and find that, hey, the job that they're doing isn't what they really want to do. And oftentimes, I've worked with clients when I was doing some more business consulting, and it's like, you know what? In fact, I remember one client specifically, he came to me, he says, I need more time with my family. And it's like, all right, so what do we do? Well, let's start looking at the business from the perspective of what can we do with the business to help you to have more time. And that was the focus that we did. But so often I find people say, well, I really don't like my job. And, the mentality is they need to find something else. And yet they're really not equipped, educated or whatever, to make those type of radical choices because they need that income. And I want your opinion on this, because what I found sometimes is I'll talk to them and say, look, what are your real purposes? What is it that you really want to accomplish? And it's like, well, my family, my life, my circumstances, I want to experience that happiness, that joy, that freedom, that type of thing. And it's like, okay, then let's look at your job as the means by which that income will come in that will allow you to do that. So rather than focusing strictly on a job as being your life, focus on that as the means by which you can truly live your life. What are your thoughts on that type of approach?
Well, I mean, that's at very minimum, that's a good idea for most people to take on that mindset, because even if they're going to transition out of it, not everyone can handle, a total financial collapse, let's say,
Yeah.
I'm in a different boat. I was a total weirdo. Like I spent, at the most extreme, I spent time hitchhiking with no money, and deliberately doing that life. I decided to do that, eventually lived in a van and did all kinds of things that I can't even recommend for people, although those were very informative I learned that I could trust the world and trust people through some pretty extreme experiences, but it could have gone the other way too. It could have been
right.
Very destructive. So for a lot of people, that's not an option. But one aspect of this that I found fascinating, and a lot of people have trouble taking this advice, but anyone who's listening, if they do apply it, it can be extremely powerful. And that is, a lot of people have this, I like to call it the demon of rebellion, tempting them all the time. And so they're living in some amount of rebellion against their own job or their boss or people at work. But they never thought, okay, what if I just go and do the absolute best job, treat everybody there the best I can, even maybe brush up on some social skills with some YouTube videos, and see what I can do to go into work every day and just do my very best. Even if you're a janitor somewhere, make every effort to clean that extra little piece that you always ignore that no one cares about. Like put yourself completely into it while you're there. Make it like even if there's almost no chance of advancement in that place, you'd be surprised who's going to notice the one man or woman who's showing up with a smile, dedicated to do the job. No matter what garbage gets thrown at them by their boss, they just learn to become, emotionally bulletproof, because no one needs to take that stuff home. It's more easy than people think to not live in reactivity to someone else's garbage. If the boss is angry, the boss is angry. It has nothing to do with you. Even if he yells at you, it has nothing to do with you. Now, of course, there could be some abuse situations. I'm not talking about accepting that, but I'm saying on a level of regular workday stuff or office stuff or factory stuff, you got to deal with some jerks sometime. Okay, fine. But it doesn't mean that you rebel against your own job. You decided to get this job, or you needed to get this job, but then people will go in and create tons of tension within themselves, hating the job. And they just don't, that's burning calories. That's burning energy to have the shoulders up, to have the chest collapse, to have the diaphragm tight, to not be breathing, to not be present. So they're there fighting against their own 8 hours, fighting against themselves. So go in and embrace it, even if you instead, and see what that's like. And that's a hard step for most people. But if you do, you're embracing those 8 hours of your precious life, Well, then maybe you see, there's a guy suffering. I'll bring a rose tomorrow. Then, I notice everybody likes apples. Come in and bring some apples. Like, just start making it a fun and alive situation. Get to know who these people are.
It becomes such a mental focus. I love that. I love that explanation. It's almost, you're talking about the physical activity. That is something very similar, that if they go into their jobs and just say, you know what, I'm going to love my job. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to just do this. You're right. It takes away a lot of that stress, a lot of that anxiety, a lot of that anger and frustration. And they can learn, they can really, I think, start to love that job.
It's possible, yeah. I've seen, it's a rare situation, but I've seen cases of that. There was a guy that worked at like a Walgreens or one of these types of stores in Eugene, Oregon. And he was an elderly fellow. But whenever I'd go in there, and I would go to that store on purpose, if I needed something that a drugstore sold, I would go to that store. I'd try to go to his line. And I noticed sometimes his line would be long and the other cashiers would have like 1 or 2 people at it. People would wait in line to see this guy. And he had worked there, I don't know, 20, 30 years, cashier. And he just always had something beautiful to say. He would give you some compliment. And you could sense he loved Walgreens. And when they were going to tear the building down and build a new one there, you could tell he was sad. He was like, oh, man, like he wanted, he was so into it. But yeah, everyone would go and wait extra time in his line just to have an interaction with him. He fully lived into that job. And so he was delighted all day long. He wasn't concerned with the money he was making. He wasn't concerned with whatever anybody else was doing. He was just making it this beautiful experience,
Well, and what's interesting about that is people, if they can achieve that type of thing, so often I think we all, at least I've experienced this, we talk about what's my purpose? How do I help people? And, how do I help the millions? How do I help, whatever? And here's someone that's working as a cashier and happy and loves what he's doing, is probably mentally really developed that. And who knows what lives he's affecting as they come through that line. I guarantee you, if that line is longer than others, that means those people need that in their lives, and he's making a difference in their lives because of the fact that he's doing that.
Yeah. And people feel so unimportant. This is all a side effect of being trapped in that world of words and ideas. Because I used to call it Ghost Island. I had a revelation in Minneapolis when I was like 18, and I was walking across the bridge across the Mississippi River to go to the giant post office. I used to do a lot of mailing letters back then, and I saw these thousands of people on the street going to work, And I tried to make eye contact with them, and I felt some desperation in myself. I felt completely alone among thousands of people. Now, okay, it's one thing to be on a desert island. Do you feel alone? Okay, well, you are alone, so you should feel that way,
Right.
but not in the city with all these people. And I would try to connect, and I tried to start conversation with a few people. And it kind of looked weird, like I took them out of a bubble. And I called it Ghost Island, meaning there's thousands of people there, but no one's actually there. There's no one home. And we can explain it away. Oh, they're busy. Oh, they're on their way to work. But that doesn't explain it on a deeper level. Why are we so disengaged, disconnected? And so if people are all lost in their own head, they can't even barely see what's going on for other people. Other people are just another annoyance or another, oh, that person's asking for some change. Oh, get all scared and weird instead of just give a quarter. People don't see the simple acts of mercy that they can perform every single day. And I'm totally a victim of that. I used to spend time playing video games or something, and then realize like I'm in some dark hole, no contact with other people. And it's really like simple acts of presence and mercy that has brought me out of that repeatedly over the years. And that could be something as simple as eye contact with the old lady sitting in the square waiting for the bus, or just a genuine sense of curiosity about how the cashier's doing. I saw this just last night. I learned phrases in Croatian, and I'll practice them when I go to the store. It's like a safe place to practice, the new language. And I said this phrase "svako dobro," which essentially translates to I wish all good things for you. And I like to say it's just a simple, short thing. And I said it and made eye contact. And my friend who was with me noticed the cashier life just flowed through her face all of a sudden. And she stopped what she was doing and like looked and said it back to me, and then went back to her work, but with a smile, and I'm not suggesting we do that for that effect. You might not always get that effect. The person might not care, but from within, seeking out and attempting to do these acts of mercy, whatever they are, you stay present, you stay out of your own head. You're not dragging your problems along with you. People are not such an annoyance to you. And you'll start to realize over time that, I like to say it like this, but that small acts of mercy compounded over time will help you prove to yourself that you're not just a total piece of shit,
Right.
And not just the idea of positive thinking, but you can look back in this aggregate of all these little honest, merciful actions, and you will know physically, okay, I can do good in this world, I'm not just some loser. I'm not just some worthless, cog in some machine somewhere. That's where the workplace can come alive, That's where we can really start to connect with life.
Yeah, I love that. So the question I have, you had mentioned that there's just a strange body technique, when we were talking earlier, that we already know about, but we never use, that can really help us overcome the panic, whatever that happens to be. What is that strange body technique that we already know about?
It's funny. This one has some taboo around it. So I want to explain panic attacks and what they are, because hopefully people can, I often say panic attacks don't exist, and then people get upset, and then I'll use that window of opportunity to explain what I mean. So as I understand, a panic attack is that the diaphragm becomes, so there's a trigger, internal, external trigger, whatever that might be. Then the already shallow breathing person starts to breathe even more shallow, to the point where the brain starts noticing, oh, okay, the diaphragm is tight. The brain only has the body to read, generally, unless there's like actually a lion coming to attack you, at which point we're not concerned, we're just reactive. So the brain starts to read, oh, the diaphragm's really tense, we're doing shallow breathing, the neck muscles are pulling up the rib cage. This means emergency. This means something's wrong right now. So then the brain reads it as emergency and says, okay, it creates a feedback loop. Now the diaphragm becomes more tense. Now the shoulders pull up even more. And since we haven't trained ourselves to breathe naturally through intense experiences, and that's what the full undoing sessions are, is breathing naturally while adding tension, pressure, and breaking apart the tensions. So since we have not done that training, we haven't become accustomed to that. As soon as there's a panic-inducing trigger, diaphragm gets tense, person starts breathing shallow, and then that shallow breathing constricts the veins in the brain. The fear constricts it further, sends the feedback loop through the body, becomes more tense, adrenaline gets released, and then the person lost in the world of words starts imagining catastrophes. Oh, I'm going to die right now. I can't breathe. So the technique, and this is tried and true, it's harder to get someone to do it when they're in the midst of a panic attack, but still worth trying. But it will also, if done in the shower, say 4 or 5 times each morning over a couple of weeks, will make it so it's impossible to have that panic attack ever again. And I've tested that with clients. And it's the gag reflex in the throat. So, when you're brushing your teeth and accidentally go too far back and you get that, like the, not throwing up, but it is related to that. And sometimes people throw up from panic attacks. It's the body's attempt to slam the diaphragm down, which is what happens with the gag reflex, or to slam it up. It comes, and then everything relaxes afterward. So 4 or 5 gag reflexes. The first one, you would notice it will release the diaphragm. Second one will release some of the rib cage, and then the breathing starts to open up. Third one releases the throat, and fourth one usually releases the face, and even the eyes will start to water a little bit. So again, I said it's taboo. People don't want to do it. It's associated with bulimia, for example, or it's just not something anyone's ever done as an actual technique,
So you're saying gag? You're saying gag?
Gag on purpose, yes.
Gagging on purpose.
Yes.
Wow. Now that's
it's better than the hospital trip. It's better than a hospital trip and very strong tranquilizers, which is what they usually do for panic attacks.
Well, and there's so much here that you're not sharing because we don't have time to do that. But you mentioned that you do have a YouTube channel, and
I do. Yeah.
I would assume that you go in there and you talk a lot more in depth about this very thing. Can you share with the audience before we close today? How do they find that YouTube channel? And also, how do they get in touch with you if they have that desire and if you're okay with that?
Yeah, totally. I do welcome clients and have a lot of different programs and courses and stuff. So I usually meet with people once over Zoom, see where they're at, what's going on in their life, and then decide from there which is the right track, the YouTube is at Radical Undoing, just as it sounds, youtube.com/Radical Undoing, RADICALUNDOING.
Okay, good. I was going to spell that, so I'm glad you did, because sometimes it's tough for people to know what we're saying here. So Radical Undoing is your YouTube channel, and in there you really talk about these exercises and some of these other things. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and there's quite a few exercise demonstrations. I've been doing that for the last 15 years, so there's a lot of things people can dive into right away. And then if you go on that, there's the tab where it says live. So you have a videos tab and you have a live tab. There's a bunch of live streams I've done as well, like small workshops, stuff about social anxiety, or tying in the exercises to various, let's say, issues or desires. So for a musician, maybe a sequence of warm-ups to get more, connect the body and voice, or the expression for improvisation, this type of stuff, So go cover it all different angles of how the work could impact your life and how to get started.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, Garrett, this has been an interesting discussion. I have to say, I really appreciate you reaching out, and I love that we've been able to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate you too, Doug. It seems like you have an interesting life. We have some parallels, so let's keep in touch. I'm really happy to connect with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And folks, thanks for listening. Please get in touch with Garrett. Go to his YouTube channel, especially, because I guarantee you're going to find some fascinating things going on there. So anyway, thanks for being here, and I hope you'll join us again soon.